The most dangerous mistake an arrogant man can make is assuming a quiet wife is a blind wife. The warm tropical breeze drifting off the Pacific carried the heavy scent of roasted Kahlua pork and blooming plumeria. Yet the fragrant Hawaiian evening did absolutely nothing to mask the suffocating entitlement radiating from my husband and his family. We were gathered at an exclusive beachfront luau in Honolulu. Torchlight flickered across the manicured lawn, casting long shadows over the polished teak tables. Tonight was staged as a lavish celebration of my husband Bradley and his latest real estate promotion. It was an event engineered solely to showcase his manufactured supremacy to anyone willing to watch. Bradley stood near the open bamboo bar, nursing an overpriced Mai Tai. He wore a crisp linen suit that strained slightly at the shoulders, basking in the undivided attention of his loyal audience. To his right stood his mother Diane, draped in silk resort wear she could never afford on her own. To his left leaned his brother Carter, alongside Carter's status-obsessed wife Megan. They formed a tight, impenetrable circle of sneering exclusivity. "Ashley is still messing around with her little online shop," Bradley scoffed, projecting his voice just enough to ensure the wealthy mainland investors at the adjacent table caught every patronizing syllable. He swirled his drink, causing the ice to clink in a harsh, irregular rhythm. "It keeps her busy while I bring home the actual bacon. It is cute, right?" Carter let out a sharp nasal snicker. Megan rolled her eyes, adjusting a diamond tennis bracelet that I knew for a fact had been charged to a ledger she had zero right to access. Diane offered a condescending, pitying smile, the kind reserved for unruly children or slow-witted pets. They expected me to shrink into my seat. They waited for the familiar flush of embarrassment to paint my cheeks. They wanted the investors to see the brilliant provider and his pathetic dependent wife. I did not flinch. I took a slow, measured sip of my sparkling water, letting the cold liquid ground my focus. My posture remained rigid, projecting nothing but icy corporate detachment. I reached into my understated leather clutch and retrieved a single folded sheet of heavily redacted financial records. The document felt heavy in my hand, loaded with undeniable, devastating truth. I slid the paper across the polished wood table. It glided smoothly, stopping exactly an inch from Bradley's manicured fingers. "Read the top line out loud, honey," I instructed, my tone slicing through the ambient ukulele music with deadly precision. "Everyone is curious." Bradley offered a dismissive chuckle, picking up the paper with a dramatic flourish. He unfolded it, intending to deliver another punchline to his adoring crowd. His eyes scanned the crisp black ink. He read one specific number, and the smugness fractured entirely. The blood drained from his face in a split second, leaving a sickly, translucent pallor behind. His jaw unhinged, the paper trembled in his sudden weak grip. Diane, sensing the terrifying shift in her golden boy demeanor, leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes darted across the highlighted ledger. She let out a sharp, breathless gasp, loud enough to silence the chatter at our table. "That is her account," Diane hissed, her voice cracking, as she turned on her son with sudden, unfiltered horror. "You told us the house money was yours." Before I reveal the exact methodology I used to dismantle their parasitic reality and trigger an inescapable federal indictment, let me know your age and where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit subscribe if you have ever had to legally and financially annihilate a toxic partner, and welcome to Sarah Told Stories. To comprehend the sheer scale of the delusion operating inside my husband's mind, we must rewind the timeline exactly 72 hours prior to that tropical gathering. I was sitting inside my locked home office. The room is fortified with soundproofing panels and dual biometric entry systems. Beyond the frosted glass windows, the rhythmic crashing of the Pacific Ocean offered a deceptive calm against the shoreline. Inside that room, I commanded a digital fortress. I am Ashley Johnson, and contrary to the arrogant jokes shared over cocktails, I do not package handmade crafts for an online boutique. I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of a premier supply chain logistics firm. My enterprise dictates the complex movement of high-value agricultural exports across international waters. More importantly, my company executes highly classified supply fulfillment contracts for the strategic military defense installations stationed throughout the Hawaiian archipelago. My days are consumed by securing transport routes, managing cargo manifests, and coordinating with base commanders to ensure critical resources arrive without a single delay. The stakes are immense. My net worth stretches well into the 8-figure range, a fact I keep fiercely guarded. I choose to navigate the world wrapped in quiet anonymity. I wear modest linen slacks and plain cotton blouses. I drive an unassuming sedan because drawing attention in my industry is a tactical liability. Wealth speaks, but true power remains invisible. Bradley, on the other hand, treated my invisible empire like his personal vanity project. He lived loudly, feeding off the financial veins of my labor. He purchased custom Italian suits to play the role of an elite real estate mogul, despite closing only 3 mediocre residential deals in the entire previous calendar year. He craved the spotlight, needing the world to view him as a self-made titan. I allowed the charade to continue because confronting his fragile ego required more energy than I cared to spend. That silent compliance was the critical vulnerability he exploited to infect my entire existence. The infection spread rapidly to his relatives, turning them into comfortable parasites. My sprawling beachfront property included a separate, pristine guest house overlooking the turquoise water. Diane occupied that immaculate space without paying a single cent in rent or property taxes. She hosted lavish, catered brunches on the travertine patio, sipping imported mimosas with her status-obsessed friends. She told everyone her brilliant son had purchased the estate specifically for her comfort. She paraded around the manicured lawns, acting like the matriarch of a dynasty she did not build. Meanwhile, his brother Carter and Carter wife Megan functioned as an endless drain on my corporate resources. They drove imported luxury utility vehicles equipped with heated leather seats and turbocharged engines. Those cars were financed directly through my corporate tax identification number. Just last month, Carter backed his vehicle into a concrete pillar, cracking the rear bumper. He tossed the keys onto my kitchen counter and told me to have my assistant handle the insurance claim because he was too busy networking. They treated me like a silent, unseen maid, employed solely to maintain their tropical resort lifestyle. The disrespect peaked during moments when my actual work collided with their leisure. Just days prior to the luau, I was finalizing a sensitive freight manifest for a naval carrier. The concentration required for military compliance is intense. The brass door handle to my office rattled sharply before Diane pushed her way inside uninvited. She carried a half-empty crystal goblet and wore a look of profound annoyance. She did not apologize for interrupting my secure workflow. Instead, she complained that the infinity pool filter was making a humming sound that disrupted her morning meditation. She demanded I call a technician right away. She then instructed me to keep my delivery boxes out of the main hallway because Megan was coming over for lunch and they needed the space to look perfect for photographs. I stared at the woman, living rent-free on my property. My fingers hovered over a keyboard holding contracts worth more than her entire bloodline would ever generate. I simply nodded, telling her I would handle the pool maintenance. She walked out, leaving a suffocating trail of expensive floral perfume in her wake. That evening, I brought the escalating disrespect up to Bradley. We stood in our expansive kitchen while he admired his reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. I calmly suggested that Diane needed to respect my workspace and perhaps contribute to her own living expenses. I noted that Carter and Megan needed to assume the lease payments for their vehicles. Bradley did not validate my concerns. He executed a flawless maneuver of psychological manipulation. He crossed his arms, looking down at me with deeply disappointed eyes. He twisted the beautiful local culture to shame my independence. He claimed I lacked the true spirit of the islands. He lectured me about family loyalty, saying that real kinship meant taking care of your own, without asking for receipts or keeping score. He accused me of being financially cold and selfish, wrapping his greed in the guise of traditional values. He brushed a stray piece of lint off his designer lapel and told me to keep my business calls quiet to avoid stressing his mother. He ordered me to stop ruining the peaceful vibe of his home. I swallowed the insult. I nodded and retreated to my sanctuary. Logistic experts do not argue with broken systems. We analyze the root cause of the failure. I realized that Bradley relied on my quiet nature to construct a reality where he reigned supreme. He needed me to remain the docile background character so he could shine under the spotlights. I had built an impenetrable fortress for my corporate clients, but I had left the front door of my personal life wide open for scavengers. My silence was no longer preserving the peace, it was funding my own degradation. 72 hours ago, the fragile illusion of their comfortable paradise met its precise expiration date. The catalyst was not a shouted argument or a dramatic physical confrontation. It was a subtle digital anomaly. My profession requires tracking microscopic discrepancies in shipping manifests. A missing crate or a delayed tracking number signals a larger systemic breach. That same trained instinct kicked in when I noticed a peculiar routing tag on our joint checking ledger. It was late at night. The house was quiet, save for the distant sound of the tide. The glow of my dual monitors cast a cool blue light across my face. I was reviewing the monthly estate expenses, ensuring the property taxes and utility transfers were aligned. Nestled between a charge for the landscaping crew and a grocery delivery was a recurring withdrawal. The amount was just under the threshold that would normally trigger an automated alert from my banking software. The transfer did not match any of our standard utility providers or known domestic vendors. Bradley believed my focus was entirely consumed by my military contracts. He assumed I never scrutinized the domestic accounts because I possessed more capital than I could ever reasonably spend in a lifetime. He mistook my lack of micromanagement for blind ignorance. He forgot that the woman paying for his tailored suits engineered surveillance systems and audited multinational supply chains for a living. I did not ask him about the strange routing number. Approaching a liar only gives them the opportunity to invent a better lie. Confrontation without evidence is merely an invitation for more manipulation. Instead, I decided to test the perimeter of his deception. I needed to see exactly how far his entitlement stretched when he thought the financial well was running dry. I began crafting a highly specific piece of bait. If he was quietly siphoning funds, his greatest fear would be the sudden collapse of his endless revenue stream. I prepared to show him a fabricated version of my business operating at a catastrophic deficit. I knew that placing a rat in a corner forces it to make desperate, sloppy moves. The tension inside my chest hardened into cold, calculating resolve. I was about to pry open the hidden ledgers, and what I would find lurking in the dark corners of his transactions would force me to initiate the most ruthless audit of my entire professional career. My professional instincts are sharpened by years of identifying microscopic vulnerabilities within global supply chains. When a shipping manifest from a Tokyo port shows a discrepancy of a few $100s, I do not ignore it. I trace the anomaly to its origin because small leaks always indicate a compromised hull. That same instinct kicked into high gear when Bradley altered his spending habits. I needed to test the perimeter of his deception without alerting him to my suspicions. I required a classic diversion to flush the rat out of the shadows. I sat at my desk and opened a sandbox environment on my workstation. I imported the genuine logistics revenue reports from the previous quarter and began manually altering the data. I systematically shifted black ink into vibrant red. I fabricated a catastrophic logistical failure involving a delayed agricultural export freighter and a canceled Department of Defense contract. The final projected quarterly loss I generated hovered near a staggering 7 figures. It looked like an authentic financial disaster. I expanded the spreadsheet to fill my primary ultra-high-definition monitor, ensuring the screen timeout function was permanently disabled. I stood up, pushed my chair back, and walked toward the kitchen to brew a fresh cup of Kona coffee. As I crossed the threshold, I deliberately left the heavy mahogany door of my office cracked open just an inch. Bradley always snooped. He disguised his intrusions as thoughtful gestures, bringing me a glass of iced lemon water or asking about our dinner reservations, but his eyes constantly darted toward my glowing screens. He possessed an insatiable, desperate hunger to gauge my worth and ensure his gravy train was running smoothly. I leaned against the cool granite of the kitchen island, holding my ceramic mug, and listened to the ambient sounds of the house. The soft, subtle creak of the hallway floorboards betrayed his approach. I watched his reflection in the hallway mirror. He paused outside my office. He pushed the door open just enough to slip his lean frame inside. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. His reflection reappeared in the glass. The smug, relaxed posture he usually carried was entirely gone. His face looked sickly pale, drawn tight with sudden, unfiltered panic. He practically sprinted down the opposite corridor, retreating toward the master bedroom. He took the bait flawlessly. When a parasite believes the host is dying, it stops feeding cautiously and attempts to drain whatever lifeblood remains before the inevitable collapse. Over the next 48 hours, Bradley behavior fractured into a frantic, chaotic mess. The smooth-talking patriarch dissolved into a desperate amateur. He skipped his morning tennis tea time at the country club. He paced the outdoor lanai for hours, gripping his smartphone with white knuckles, muttering hushed, panicked commands to unknown recipients on the other end of the line. His terror manifested as fatal, sloppy financial errors. Previously, his extraction of my capital had been subtle. He would utilize structured microtransactions, moving small, unnoticeable sums through disguised vendor payments. But the fake spreadsheet convinced him the well was drying up tomorrow. He abandoned caution for speed. He logged into our secondary marital account using his personal unsecured tablet, connected directly to our home wireless network. Because I administer the network protocols, I captured the unencrypted traffic instantly. He attempted to push an $80,000 wire transfer in a single clumsy transaction. The alert hit my secure server, and I knew it was time to drop the hammer. I walked into my home office and pushed the heavy mahogany door shut. I engaged the biometric deadbolt. The steel mechanism clicked into place with a satisfying thud, sealing me inside my digital fortress. The ambient temperature in the room dropped, courtesy of the dedicated air conditioning unit, cooling my private servers. I sat in my ergonomic chair and booted up my encrypted dual-monitor setup. The screens illuminated, casting a cool blue glow across my face. I initiated a comprehensive forensic audit. I bypassed the superficial joint checking statements that Bradley thought were so secure and dug directly into the back-end routing logs. I pulled the raw transaction data stretching back 14 months and exported it into a master analytical spreadsheet. The numbers staring back at me constituted a gaping, bleeding wound. Row after row, column after column, the sheer scale of his theft unfurled across my monitors. Bradley had systematically siphoned off the profits of my logistical empire. He disguised the outgoing wire transfers under legitimate-sounding corporate headers, labeling them as mainland real estate investments and aggressive portfolio expansions. He routed the cash to limited liability companies registered in Nevada and Wyoming. But authentic real estate ventures leave a specific, undeniable paper trail. They generate title fees, escrow deposits, and municipal appraisal invoices. The transactions glaring at me from the screen lacked any corresponding institutional documentation. There were no deeds attached to these transfers. The capital was simply vanishing into the digital ether. I traced the routing numbers, cross-referencing the destination accounts with public business registries. The Nevada and Wyoming entities were phantom shells. They existed solely on paper, acting as digital funnels to wash the stolen funds before routing them back into private accounts controlled exclusively by my husband. He viewed my grueling labor, my sleepless nights coordinating military cargo, and my immense professional stress as an endless, unearned teller machine. He extracted my wealth to fund a hollow Playboy aesthetic. Every custom Italian suit hanging in his closet, every expensive bottle of champagne he popped for his mainland investors, every lavish brunch his mother hosted on my patio was paid for with stolen capital. He lectured me about the spirit of family loyalty while his hand was buried elbow-deep in my corporate treasury. The betrayal stung, but the sting quickly evaporated, burned away by a rising tide of cold, clinical clarity. When an expert auditor uncovers critical fraud, they do not surrender to their emotions. They do not scream. They do not storm into the living room, shatter a vase, and demand a tearful explanation. Confrontation is a useless currency in the realm of corporate warfare. Tears and shouting only give the thief an opportunity to invent better lies and hide the remaining assets. I sat in the quiet chill of my office, breathing slowly and evenly. I saved the master spreadsheet, exporting the devastating proof onto a secure encrypted physical drive. I mapped the compromised perimeter. I severed his digital access to my primary business ledgers, deploying silent background protocols that would simulate normal operations while locking him out of the actual capital. I was quietly sealing the exits and building a trial-ready federal case. The real warfare had officially commenced. Yet as I categorized the final outward transfer, a distinct anomaly caught my attention. The missing liquid cash accounted for a staggering deficit, but the numbers still felt strangely unbalanced. A predator intoxicated by his own success does not merely eat the loose scraps left on the table. They go for the foundation. My eyes drifted toward a secure digital folder containing the foundational assets of my personal wealth, the physical real estate portfolio. A chilling realization crept up the back of my neck, settling heavily at the base of my skull. I minimized the banking spreadsheets and opened the county title registry software. I typed in the parcel identification number for the beachfront estate I was currently sitting inside. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, preparing to look at the official deed to my own home. Siphoning liquid capital was merely the superficial skin of a much deeper rot. Draining checking accounts and diverting business profits required a certain level of careless greed, but orchestrating a structural attack on my primary assets required deliberate, calculated malice. I sat in the chilled air of my secure home office, staring at the blinking cursor on my twin monitors. My hands rested flat against the cool mahogany desk. The rhythmic crashing of the ocean outside my window faded into a dull, distant hum. My professional intuition, honed by years of tracking missing cargo across international waters, warned me that the missing cash was only a symptom of a much larger terminal disease. A thief intoxicated by early success never stops at the loose change resting on the table. They search for the vault. I opened a secure browser window and navigated to the Hawaii Bureau of Conveyances portal. The state database utilizes an archaic, clunky interface requiring exact parcel identification numbers to access official property records. I typed the specific geographic codes for the beachfront estate I was currently sitting inside. I had purchased this property 6 years ago, utilizing the profits from a grueling 3-year military supply contract. To protect the estate from personal liability, I placed the deed entirely under the protective umbrella of my primary limited liability corporation. Bradley held zero legal ownership. He possessed no equity. He was, legally speaking, merely a guest residing within a corporate asset. The search results populated on my screen. I scanned the list of recorded documents, expecting to see only the original clean deed of trust. Instead, a glaring red notification icon illuminated the top corner of the registry dashboard. The system flagged a new encumbrance recorded just 6 months prior. I leaned forward, the leather of my ergonomic chair creaking softly in the quiet room. The air caught in my throat. A cold bead of sweat traced the line of my spine. The document attached to my corporate property was a second mortgage. The principal amount listed in stark black text was $850,000. My vision tunneled, focusing entirely on that staggering number. $850,000 of hard-earned equity had been carved out of my home without my knowledge. A transaction of this magnitude on a corporate asset requires rigid underwriting protocols. It demands unanimous resolutions from the managing members, biometric identity verification, and rigorous legal scrutiny. Bradley could not simply walk into a branch and leverage a house he did not own. The institutional barriers were designed to be impenetrable. I clicked the icon to download the raw origination documents. The high-resolution scans loaded row by row. I parsed through the dense legal jargon, searching for the specific mechanism he used to bypass the corporate shields. I reached the final page, the signature ledger. My eyes locked onto the ink. It was my name, written in a near-perfect emulation of my looping cursive script, but a seasoned logistician knows how to spot a counterfeit manifest. I zoomed in, magnifying the digital artifact to 400%. The edges of the date stamp next to my forged signature were slightly blurred, exhibiting the distinct pixelation of a cheap software manipulation tool. He had not just practiced signing my name on a blank sheet of paper, he had engaged in digital document altering. The accompanying authorization file provided the missing puzzle piece. It was a power of attorney. 3 years ago, I was grounded in Tokyo, negotiating a complex agricultural export tariff during a severe typhoon. A critical shipment of refrigerated cargo containers was held up at the Honolulu port, requiring an immediate physical signature to clear customs. To prevent a catastrophic loss of inventory, I drafted a highly restricted temporary power of attorney, granting Bradley the limited authority to release that specific cargo. The document expired 48 hours after it was issued. Bradley had kept a scanned copy of that expired document hidden on his personal drive. He utilized basic editing software to alter the execution dates, expanding the scope of the authorization to grant himself sweeping financial control over my corporate entities. He manufactured a skeleton key. Yet a modified document alone is useless against a competent financial institution. Bank underwriters are trained to verify the authenticity of corporate authorizations and scrutinize out-of-state notary stamps. A stale, altered power of attorney should have triggered an immediate fraud lock. I scrolled down to the notary seal and the name of the authorizing loan officer. The puzzle pieces snapped together with sickening clarity. The loan officer listed on the origination file was a junior underwriter named Lance. I recognized the name instantly. Lance was a frequent guest at the country club, a man who regularly joined Bradley for his weekly golf outings. They drank imported scotch together and smoked expensive cigars on the clubhouse patio. Bradley had not bypassed the bank protocols using sheer intellect. He bypassed them using corruption. He colluded with a dirty insider, leveraging their country club friendship to push a highly toxic fraudulent loan through the underwriting department without triggering a single corporate verification call to my office. I sat back processing the sheer, terrifying audacity of the conspiracy. He weaponized a forged document and a corrupt loan officer to extract nearly $1 million of my equity out of thin air. The next logical step was tracking the dispersal of the stolen funds. Banks do not hand over $850,000 in unmarked bills. The capital had to flow into a receiving account. I accessed the wire transfer logs attached to the loan closure. The money was routed directly into an escrow account held by a commercial development firm based in Waikiki. I opened a new tab and ran a background query on the development firm. The corporate registry listed Bradley as the primary managing partner. He had used my stolen equity to fund an ambitious luxury condominium flip in the heart of the tourist district. He frequently boasted at dinner parties about his brilliant, aggressive real estate strategies, claiming he was on the verge of reshaping the Honolulu skyline. He needed a monumental win to validate the wealthy patriarch persona he so desperately projected to his mother and brother. I pulled the municipal building permits and inspection records for his supposed masterpiece project. The reality of his business acumen was laid bare on my screen. The Waikiki project was a spectacular, catastrophic failure. The construction permits were suspended due to severe structural code violations. The electrical wiring failed 3 consecutive municipal inspections. The general contractors had filed massive liens against the property for unpaid invoices. The luxury condominium was nothing more than an empty, decaying concrete shell, hemorrhaging cash every single day. Bradley possessed zero actual talent for real estate development. He was an amateur, playing a high-stakes game with stolen chips. When his foolish condominium project began collapsing under the weight of his own incompetence, he panicked. Instead of admitting failure, he decided to double down, burning through the $850,000 in a frantic, doomed attempt to save his fragile ego. The true cruelty of his strategy crystallized in my mind. He structured the fraudulent second mortgage specifically so that my corporate entity bore the entire burden of the debt. The loan terms included a balloon payment scheduled to detonate in exactly 4 months. He knew the Waikiki project would never generate the revenue needed to cover that payment. He was fully prepared to let the loan go into default. When the bank inevitably initiated foreclosure proceedings, they would target the collateral. They would seize my pristine beachfront estate. Bradley intended to let my home burn to the ground. He planned to walk away with clean hands, playing the role of the tragic victim, while the bank dismantled the corporate shield I spent 8 grueling years building. He would let me take the catastrophic legal and financial fall, leaving me destitute while he searched for a new host to parasitize. A sharp, cold energy radiated outward from my chest, numbing the initial sting of betrayal. Tears are a useless currency in the face of federal wire fraud. I did not feel sorrow. I felt the profound, calculating stillness of an executioner preparing a lethal injection. I cross-referenced the remaining balances on the Waikiki project ledgers. A glaring discrepancy emerged from the data. Fixing a failed concrete shell is expensive, but the contractor invoices and permit fines did not account for the entire $850,000. Even with his staggering incompetence, the math failed to balance. There was a significant chunk of capital missing from the construction logs. Roughly $200,000 had vanished from the escrow account, bypassing the building site entirely. A man drowning in a failed real estate venture does not simply misplace $200,000. He diverts it. He builds a hidden reserve to soothe the stress of his impending professional collapse. I closed the property registry portal and opened a secure financial tracking tool utilized by my logistics compliance team. If the money did not go into the concrete, it went into a lifestyle. I initiated a reverse trace on the secondary wire transfers bleeding out of the Waikiki escrow account. The digital breadcrumbs led away from the failed construction site, crossing the ocean channel and pointing directly toward the neighboring island of Maui. I tightened my grip on the computer mouse, leaning into the glow of the monitors. The financial autopsy was about to reveal a secret far more sickening than a failed condo flip. Siphoning liquid capital was merely the superficial skin of a much deeper rot. Draining checking accounts and diverting business profits required a certain level of careless greed, but orchestrating a structural attack on my primary assets required deliberate, calculated intent. I sat in the chilled air of my secure home office, staring at the blinking cursor on my twin monitors. The rhythmic crashing of the ocean outside my window faded into a dull, distant hum. My professional intuition, honed by years of tracking missing cargo across international waters, warned me that the missing cash was only a symptom of a terminal disease. A thief intoxicated by early success never stops at the loose change resting on the table. They search for the vault. The math surrounding the failed Waikiki condominium project simply refused to balance. Fixing a decaying concrete shell is an expensive endeavor, yet the contractor invoices and municipal fines did not account for the entire extracted sum. A significant portion of the capital was missing from the construction logs. Roughly $200,000 had vanished from the escrow account, bypassing the building site entirely. A man drowning in a ruined real estate venture does not simply misplace that kind of money. He diverts it. He builds a hidden reserve to soothe the stress of his impending professional collapse. Money always leaves a digital fingerprint. I closed the property registry portal and opened a secure financial tracking tool utilized by my logistics compliance team. I initiated a reverse trace on the secondary wire transfers bleeding out of the Waikiki escrow account. The digital breadcrumbs led away from the failed construction site, crossing the ocean channel and pointing directly toward the neighboring island of Maui. I isolated the residual transfers. The routing sequence bypassed traditional investment portfolios entirely. The capital poured directly into an obscure private checking account registered under a single initial and a post office box. I ran a skip trace on the routing structure bridging the gap between the obscured account and its outgoing vendor payments. The ledger refreshed, populating the screen with relentless clarity. The vendor receiving these substantial tranches of cash was an exclusive boutique resort located on the western coast of Maui. The establishment catered specifically to elite tourists, offering isolated cliffside villas and uncompromising privacy. Bradley frequently traveled to Maui for what he described as critical commercial scouting expeditions. He claimed he was expanding our real estate footprint, inspecting oceanfront acreage for future development. The ledger proved he was not inspecting empty land. He was paying for a continuous, year-long luxury lease. Infidelity is a common mundane tragedy. Husbands stray, egos demand constant validation. But Bradley was not merely sustaining a weekend affair with generic discretionary funds. He was subsidizing a lavish, hidden double life, utilizing the stolen equity from my primary residence. He was extracting the secure foundation of my future to finance a tropical playground for another woman. The emotional insult faded, instantly replaced by the cold, sterile logic of an impending corporate execution. I did not shed a tear over his wandering eye. I needed incontrovertible physical proof of his movements to secure the legal perimeter. Digital logs can be contested in court by a clever attorney claiming identity theft or a compromised banking login. I required indisputable geographic verification, tying the man directly to the stolen capital. Providing discrete supply fulfillment for strategic military defense bases requires extraordinary security measures. When my logistics firm transports highly classified hardware or sensitive agricultural exports across the Hawaiian archipelago, we do not rely on standard barcode scanning. We utilize military-grade microlocation trackers. These devices are smaller than a standard coin, encased in durable polymer, and designed to broadcast encrypted geographic coordinates directly to a proprietary satellite network. I keep a secure lockbox of these transponders inside my home office for emergency deployment. I unlocked the heavy steel safe beneath my desk and retrieved a single smooth black disc. It weighed practically nothing. I synced the hardware serial number to my private surveillance dashboard, watching the green indicator light pulse twice to confirm satellite connectivity. Thursday evening arrived, accompanied by the scent of upcoming rain and the deceptive hum of domestic tranquility. Bradley was packing for his latest supposed scouting trip. I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom holding a folded cashmere sweater, watching him meticulously organize his luggage. He hummed a cheerful tune, selecting his tailored linen shirts and expensive imported loafers. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. "The project in Wailea is heating up," he said, tossing a silk tie into his leather weekender bag. "I need to be on the ground early tomorrow to meet with the zoning commissioners. It will be a grueling weekend of negotiations, but the payoff will secure our retirement." He offered me a charming, rehearsed smile. I handed him the cashmere sweater, returning his smile with an empty, practiced expression of my own. "I hope the meetings prove fruitful," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. His custom golf bag sat propped against the corner of the room. He never traveled without his clubs, claiming the green was the only place true business occurred. While he stepped into the master bathroom to retrieve his toiletry kit, I crossed the room silently. I unzipped the deep side pocket of the heavy leather golf bag, slipping my hand beneath the interior fabric lining. I pressed the tiny black transponder deep into the structural seam, securing it tight against the inner chassis. I zipped the pocket shut just as the bathroom faucet clicked off. I was already turning away, inspecting a loose thread on my sleeve by the time he re-emerged. Friday morning, the tracking protocol engaged. I sat in my downtown Honolulu high-rise office, drinking dark roast coffee and watching a digital map of the Hawaiian Islands sprawl across my monitor. The blinking green dot representing my husband departed Oahu and touched down at the Kahului airport, exactly on schedule. But the dot did not travel toward the municipal zoning offices. It did not move toward any active commercial real estate developments. The transponder traveled straight to an upscale outdoor shopping promenade in Wailea. I cross-referenced the geographic coordinates with a satellite street view. The blinking green dot remained stationary inside a high-end jewelry boutique for 45 minutes. He was purchasing gifts. The digital marker then shifted, tracing a path down to the local marina. It lingered at dock number 4. A quick search of the harbor registry confirmed dock number 4 housed a luxury catamaran charter service. He was enjoying a private sunset cruise upon the Pacific waters. By evening, the dot finally settled at the remote boutique resort I had identified in the forensic audit. The location locked into place, confirming he had retreated to his cliffside villa. I tracked the device throughout the entire weekend. The pattern was undeniable. Fine dining establishments, isolated beaches, and continuous extended stays at the luxury lease. He was housing a mainland mistress in total comfort, treating her to an extravagant tropical paradise. To watch the man you married squander your hard-earned wealth on another woman is a unique psychological test. He was treating my logistics empire as his personal playground, expecting me to foot the bill for his betrayal. But the simple realization of an affair felt incomplete. Bradley was an arrogant amateur, prone to careless mistakes. A man this sloppy does not suddenly engineer a seamless, multi-layered bank fraud operation involving forged powers of attorney and corrupt loan officers without external influence. The architecture of the mortgage theft was too sophisticated for his limited capabilities. I needed to know exactly who was benefiting from this stolen equity. I needed a name, a face, and a digital footprint. If I wanted to reclaim my capital and ensure his permanent ruin, I had to identify the secondary target. On Sunday evening, as the tracking dot remained stationary at the resort, I deployed a specialized network interception tool. I aimed my focus at the unsecured wireless network of the boutique hotel, isolating the specific data packets originating from his villa. I monitored the unencrypted digital traffic, hunting for an identifying signature. The outgoing web requests painted a vivid portrait of his hidden companion. She was not merely lounging by the pool, she was accessing professional real estate licensing portals, transferring large files to mainland servers, and drafting highly sensitive emails. I intercepted a single outgoing message that shattered the conventional narrative of a simple cheating husband. As the text populated on my screen, the true horrifying reality of the Maui Trail materialized before my eyes. This was not a romance fueled by stolen cash. It was a severe, orchestrated hostage situation, and the executioner was already holding the blade. The glowing screen of my monitor cast long, sharp shadows across my dark home office. I sat perfectly still, watching the intercepted data packets assemble themselves into a coherent narrative. The specialized routing software translated the raw digital traffic from the resort wireless network into plain text documents. My eyes scanned the outgoing messages originating from the specific villa where the microlocator beacon was currently pinging. The sender identified herself simply as Lauren. I ran a secondary query through the state licensing boards, cross-referencing the resort guest registry. Lauren was 24 years old. She portrayed herself online as an aspiring luxury property broker, but the state database confirmed her real estate license was suspended. She possessed no legitimate credentials. She lacked any legal authority to broker commercial developments. Yet the emails she was drafting from the comfort of that cliffside villa were not casual romantic notes to a wealthy lover. They were highly structured, cold-blooded demands. I clicked on an email thread dated 3 weeks prior, sent directly to the private, encrypted inbox my husband maintained. The subject line read simply, "Waikiki escrow deficit." I expected to find a mistress complaining about a lack of attention or demanding a new designer handbag. What I read instead sent a chilling wave of pure forensic satisfaction through my chest. Lauren was not a passive accessory draped over the arm of my husband. She was the architect of his impending doom. The message detailed the exact financial shortfall of his collapsing condominium project. She laid out the municipal fines, the contractor liens, and the impending balloon payment with the precision of a seasoned auditor. The subsequent paragraphs outlined a deeply disturbing timeline. When the Waikiki project initially began hemorrhaging cash, Bradley had panicked. He attempted to project wealth, but his mistress quickly realized his pockets were entirely empty. She recognized that he was merely a hollow frontman spending the logistics fortune I had built. Instead of packing her bags and finding a genuine millionaire, Lauren recognized a unique opportunity for extreme exploitation. The intercepted text proved she was the one who originally suggested he utilize the expired power of attorney. She explicitly directed him to alter the digital dates and leverage his country club relationship with the corrupt loan officer. She coached him through the exact steps necessary to forge my signature and secure the $850,000 second mortgage. She helped him construct the guillotine, and then she gladly handed him the rope. But her assistance was never an act of twisted devotion. It was a calculated investment. The emails revealed that Lauren had quietly retained copies of the original, unaltered legal documents alongside the forged versions Bradley eventually submitted to the bank. She possessed the digital metadata, proving his direct involvement in the document manipulation. The moment the loan cleared underwriting and the stolen equity hit the escrow accounts, she triggered her trap. I read her latest message, sent just hours ago while he was supposedly out scouting properties on the island. The wording was devoid of any affection. "I expect the villa lease renewed for another 6 months by Tuesday," she wrote. "The designer boutique charge was higher than anticipated this morning, so you need to wire an additional $15,000 into the private checking account. If the transfer stalls or you decide to cut the funding, I will forward the metadata surrounding your forged corporate documents directly to the Honolulu Police Department Fraud Division. I am sure your successful wife will be fascinated to learn why her primary estate is facing foreclosure. Do not test me. Send the funds." The profound irony of the situation settled over me like a heavy winter blanket. Bradley believed he was an apex predator, prowling the tropical social scene, manipulating a naive wife while funding a glamorous secret life. The reality was utterly pathetic. He was nothing more than desperate, terrified prey, trapped in a suffocating extortion loop. He was not buying expensive jewelry or renting private catamaran charters because he wanted to impress a beautiful woman. He was bleeding my corporate accounts dry because he was being actively blackmailed by a 24-year-old unlicensed hustler who held the keys to his federal prison sentence. Every time he swiped my stolen capital to pay for her luxury lifestyle, he was paying ransom money to keep himself out of handcuffs. A typical spouse, discovering such profound betrayal, might collapse into tears, grieving the death of their marriage. They might confront the cheating husband, demanding an explanation for the lies. I did not shed a single tear. My resting pulse rate did not elevate. The emotional component of my marriage evaporated instantly, replaced entirely by the cold, sterile atmosphere of a high-stakes corporate litigation. The man I married was effectively dead to me. In his place stood a massive financial liability that needed to be surgically excised from my logistics empire. I highlighted the extortion demands, the routing numbers, and the explicit confessions of bank fraud scattered throughout the intercepted emails. I compiled the data into a secure, encrypted folder alongside the location tracking logs and the forged mortgage deeds. I did not just have a cheating partner. I possessed two fully documented, trial-ready federal suspects entangled in a severe racketeering web. By utilizing interstate digital networks to extort stolen capital derived from bank fraud, they had elevated their miserable suburban affair into a major organized crime syndicate. They crossed a boundary that local authorities rarely handle. They invited the jurisdiction of the federal government. The sheer scale of their arrogance was breathtaking. Bradley lectured me about family loyalty and the spirit of the islands, while quietly paying protection money to a blackmailer using my hard-earned equity. He forced me to endure the condescension of his mother and the blatant disrespect of his brother, all while he lived in perpetual fear of a single email destroying his life. He paraded around our beachfront estate acting like a self-made titan, while secretly scrambling to appease a woman holding a digital knife to his throat. His weakness disgusted me even more than his infidelity. He allowed an amateur to trap him. He surrendered the security of our marital assets because he lacked the intellect to navigate the very fraud he attempted to commit. A logistician views a compromised supply node as a threat that must be isolated and neutralized. Bradley was a compromised node, bleeding capital and exposing my corporate structures to unacceptable legal risks. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, watching the cursor blink at the end of the final intercepted extortion threat. My husband thought he was fighting a localized battle to preserve his fragile ego. His blackmailer thought she had secured an endless tropical payday. Neither of them understood the magnitude of the sleeping giant they had just disturbed. You do not steal from a chief executive officer who builds secure supply chains for military defense bases and expect to walk away breathing. You do not leverage a corporate stronghold without triggering a catastrophic structural defense response. The evidence was now absolute and irrefutable. I saved the final packet of intercepted communications, severing my connection to the resort wireless network. The room grew silent again, leaving me alone with the staggering proof of their shared criminality. The time for silent observation was officially over. I needed a professional executioner to help me drop the blade. I reached for my secure cellular device, pulling up a contact I reserved strictly for existential corporate threats. It was time to bring in a litigator who viewed legal warfare not as a profession, but as a blood sport. I tapped the screen, preparing to make the call that would officially ignite their total destruction. With the digital extortion packets secured alongside the forged mortgage deed and the satellite tracking logs, I bypassed the traditional routes of domestic litigation. Family law practitioners often seek mediation, aiming for equitable asset division and amicable resolutions. My situation did not call for mediation. I required a specialist who approached conflict as a scorched earth campaign. I contacted Elias. Serving as the primary outside counsel for my logistics firm, Elias specialized in high-stakes military contract disputes and international trade compliance. He operated out of a sterile, minimalist office in downtown Honolulu, possessing a reputation for dismantling opposing counsel with surgical detachment. I transmitted the encrypted dossier to his secure server just before dawn. My phone rang 10 minutes later. Elias did not offer empty condolences regarding my broken marriage. He did not ask how I was coping with the emotional fallout. He simply requested my explicit authorization to initiate a federal strike. I gave the order without hesitation. We transformed my home office into a clandestine command center, operating in total silence while my husband played the role of a successful tycoon across the hall. Standard civil litigation moves at a glacial pace, affording fraudsters ample opportunity to liquidate assets and flee the jurisdiction. Elias and I sidestepped the state courts entirely. Armed with incontrovertible proof of wire fraud and ongoing extortion, we filed an emergency ex parte motion directly with a federal judge. We cited an immediate, severe risk of flight, detailing the racketeering conspiracy unfolding between my husband and his unlicensed real estate companion in Maui. The ex parte designation meant the filings remained sealed under strict judicial oversight. Bradley would receive no warning, no summons, and no opportunity to drain whatever equity remained untouched. The federal magistrate reviewed the digital metadata and the microlocator breadcrumbs. Within hours, the judge granted our petitions, authorizing sweeping asset seizure warrants and uncompromising civil restraining orders. The legal snare was woven with titanium threads, waiting quietly in the shadows. Isolating the primary target required severing the auxiliary lifelines. Bradley's family had thrived as comfortable appendages to my corporate infrastructure, and their extraction needed to be highly methodical. I accessed my vendor management dashboard and located the vehicle leases assigned to Carter and Megan. The imported luxury SUVs they flaunted around the island were registered under my primary corporate tax identification number. I drafted a formal termination notice to the leasing agency, revoking the financial guarantee and flagging both vehicles for immediate repossession. The leasing agents were instructed to place a discreet hold on the vehicles, prepping the recovery teams to stand by. Next, I contacted my commercial property management firm. Diane occupied the $1 million beachfront guest house under the false belief that her son owned the deed. She spent her days lounging on teak furniture I purchased, drinking wine I imported. I instructed the management directors to draft a commercial lockout directive. They prepared the eviction paperwork and retained a private security contractor, holding the deployment order in a pending queue. The instructions were explicit. The locks were to be drilled and replaced the moment I issued the final signal. To ensure my own liquidity remained untouchable during the impending fallout, I executed a sweeping transfer of my logistics operating capital. I shifted the funds from standard commercial accounts into heavy biometric-secured trusts. Every dollar I possessed was now shielded behind layers of military-grade encryption. It required dual authentication, retina scans, and randomized token generation to move even a single cent. I effectively fortified my empire, pulling the drawbridge up and leaving the parasites stranded outside the castle walls. The final component of our strategy required immaculate timing. A conventional victim might freeze the compromised accounts the second they discovered the theft. That reflex brings instant satisfaction, but allows the thief to control the narrative, spinning lies to their social circle from the safety of their living room. I denied Bradley that privilege. I wanted his exposure to be public, undeniable, and utterly humiliating. I coordinated directly with the Bank Fraud Division and Elias to engineer a delayed detonation. We programmed an automated live freeze on every joint account, credit line, and secondary ledger attached to Bradley's name. We embedded a specific chronological trigger within the banking software, linking it to the central server clock. The detonation was scheduled for exactly 7 o'clock in the evening on the upcoming Saturday. Saturday was the night of the beachfront luau. My husband had invited dozens of wealthy mainland investors, local politicians, and his entire arrogant family to celebrate his fabricated real estate triumphs. He intended to stand under the tiki torches, drinking imported rum and basking in the adoration of his peers, while I stood quietly in the background. He planned to use my stolen wealth to cement his status as a self-made titan of industry. I let him keep that delusion for 3 more days. I washed his linen suits. I confirmed the premium catering orders. I smiled when his mother demanded expensive champagne for her personal table. During a passing conversation in the hallway, Carter boasted about a new luxury watch he planned to buy, assuming his brother would cover the tab. I simply nodded, agreeing that he deserved to treat himself. I absorbed their subtle insults and condescending smirks with the serene patience of a hunter observing a target wander directly onto a marked drop zone. They strutted around my property, wearing clothes bought with my money, driving cars I financed, and boasting about a kingdom that was already legally pulverized. The contrast between their swelling egos and the impending federal hammer created a delicious, intoxicating tension. Bradley spent his afternoons adjusting the floral arrangements and practicing his welcoming speech, entirely oblivious to the digital crosshairs resting squarely on his chest. He complained about the cost of the tiki torches, ironically lecturing me about sticking to a budget, while I nodded and poured him another glass of iced tea. The stage was immaculately set, the guests were arriving, and the clock was ticking relentlessly towards 7. The island breeze began to pick up, carrying the sweet scent of roasted pork across the lawn, signaling the arrival of a devastating storm that would wash away their entire world. They were all too busy admiring their reflections in the polished glasses to notice the dark clouds gathering overhead, unaware that the countdown timer ticking inside the banking servers was about to strike 0. The morning sun crested the volcanic peaks, casting a brilliant golden light across the crashing waves of the Pacific. Saturday had arrived, carrying a sickly sweet layer of dramatic irony. The air inside my beachfront estate tasted thick with floral notes and the impending scent of unearned triumph. I stood barefoot on the cool slate tiles of my gourmet kitchen, cradling a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. My pulse beat with a steady, rhythmic cadence. The trap was locked, waiting for the evening hours, but the daytime required a masterful performance of domestic submission. Diane glided into the kitchen wearing a flowing silk caftan that brushed against the floorboards. She carried herself with the haughty posture of a dowager empress inspecting her domain. In her manicured hand, she held the sleek silver key fob to an imported luxury sport utility vehicle. She tossed the keys onto the polished granite island. The metal clattered against the stone, demanding my attention. Bradley truly outdid himself this time, Diane announced, running her fingers through her salon-styled hair. Driving that European engine down the coastal highway is a dream. He mentioned upgrading the interior leather next quarter. A mother deserves the best, and my son knows how to deliver. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the dark liquid warm my throat. The irony was so rich, it felt tangible. The vehicle she praised no longer belonged to her bloodline. Just 12 hours prior, I had severed the corporate guarantee backing that specific lease. My legal team had filed the recovery paperwork. At this very moment, a local repossession agency was tracking the internal geographic transponder, preparing to hook the pristine bumper and tow it into an impound lot. She was bragging about a car that was effectively stolen property. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors, the backyard painted a portrait of exquisite laziness. Carter and Megan lounged on the imported teak deck chairs beside the infinity pool. The turquoise water mirrored the cloudless sky. They were already drinking. Megan held a crystal flute of my vintage champagne, laughing at a joke Carter made while he adjusted his designer sunglasses. They lived in a perpetual state of vacation, insulated from the friction of actual labor. Megan stood up, wrapping a sheer cover-up around her waist, and slid open the glass door to join us in the kitchen. She poured herself a fresh glass of champagne, spilling a few drops onto the granite. She did not bother to wipe it up. "The guest house is starting to feel incredibly dated," Megan sighed, leaning against the counter and looking out toward the secondary structure, where she and Carter frequently crashed. "The bathroom tiles lack a modern aesthetic. It feels very early 2000s. We need a refreshing look if we are going to keep hosting those mainland investors for weekend retreats." Diane nodded in fierce agreement, pouring herself a cup of espresso. "I already spoke to Bradley about it. He promised to fund a full luxury renovation next month. He intends to bring in that high-end contractor from Honolulu. We want imported marble." My mother-in-law turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes narrowed, inspecting my plain cotton blouse and simple trousers. She offered a tight, pitying smile. "You really should ask him for business advice, Ashley. Your little shop must be struggling these days. He could teach you a few things about generating actual revenue. Real estate is where the true power lies." I did not flinch. I did not correct her assumptions. When you hold the executioner sword, you do not argue with the condemned about the sharpness of the blade. I offered them a practiced, fragile smile that purposely failed to reach my eyes. "You are right, Diane," I replied, keeping my tone soft and appropriately exhausted. "The market has been tough lately. I will definitely see if Bradley has time to review my ledgers. His insight would be incredibly helpful." She beamed, practically glowing with the satisfaction of putting me in my designated place. "Just remember to be supportive tonight," she instructed, waving a dismissive hand. "This luau is crucial for his public image. Try to blend in and let him shine." They strutted out of the kitchen, taking their entitlement back to the pool deck. I remained by the island, watching them through the glass. The cognitive dissonance was intoxicating. They were charting renovations for a guest house that was currently slated for an immediate commercial lockout. They were planning the future of a kingdom that had already structurally collapsed beneath their designer sandals. Inside my leather purse, resting on the adjacent counter, sat a thick manila envelope. The contents included the sealed federal asset seizure warrants, the civil restraining orders, and the irrefutable evidence of interstate wire fraud. While they floated on inflatable loungers and debated marble tile samples, the United States justice system was preparing to erase their entire existence. The contrast between their swelling egos and the impending legal hammer provided a uniquely satisfying thrill. The hours slipped away as the catering crews arrived. Trucks bearing the logos of elite event planners parked along the street. Workers hauled heavy tables, tiki torches, and sound equipment across the lawn. Bradley emerged from the master suite around late afternoon. He wore crisp linen trousers and a tailored shirt, his hair styled to project effortless island wealth. He barked orders at the caterers, demanding the roasted pork be positioned exactly in the center of the patio and instructing the bartender to strictly pour the premium liquor. He spotted me standing near the lanai and strutted over, checking his reflection in the glass doors. "Make sure you wear that navy dress," he ordered, not bothering to make eye contact. "It looks respectable, but does not draw too much attention. Tonight is about networking with the heavy hitters. I need you to play the supportive background role. Can you manage that?" "I can manage the background perfectly," I assured him, securing the strap of my purse over my shoulder. "I will not interfere with your spotlight." He grunted in approval, turning his back to greet the first arriving guests. He thought he was commanding a subordinate. He failed to realize he was giving instructions to the architect of his own demise. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Hawaiian sky in vivid shades of orange and bruised purple, the estate filled with the clinking of glasses and boastful laughter. Mainland investors, local politicians, and competing developers crowded the lawn. Bradley worked the perimeter, shaking hands and weaving elaborate fictions about his upcoming commercial projects. He fed them the same lies he used to extract equity from my property. I navigated the edge of the party, a ghost in my own home. I watched Elias, my ruthless corporate litigator, arrive. He did not wear a tropical shirt. He wore a dark-tailored suit that looked profoundly out of place against the festive backdrop. Elias stood near the driveway, nursing a club soda, his sharp eyes tracking Bradley movements. We exchanged a single imperceptible nod. The perimeter was secured. The federal trap was armed, and the fuse was burning down to its final minutes. The catering staff began serving the main courses. The string quartet played a lively melody. Diane Carter and Megan occupied the premier table, acting like royalty, accepting tributes from the passing guests. I took my seat at a smaller table nearby, placing my designer clutch carefully on my lap. The digital clock on my encrypted smartphone read 6:45 in the evening. 15 minutes remained until the automated banking freeze triggered across all institutional servers. Bradley took the center stage, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass to command the attention of the crowd. He intended to deliver a speech cementing his fabricated legacy. He cleared his throat, a wide, predatory grin stretching across his face. But a predator operating without situational awareness is nothing more than future prey. The night was proceeding flawlessly, but a sudden, unexpected variable threatened to disrupt the pristine timeline. I felt a sharp, persistent vibration emanating from my purse. It was a secure communication channel used only by my logistics firm's security division. A message flashed across the screen, carrying a high-priority alert from the mainland. The mistress in Maui had not remained passive. She had made a desperate, unscheduled move, altering the trajectory of the evening and forcing me to accelerate the execution before Bradley even finished his opening sentence. I glanced down at the incoming encrypted alert on my secure mobile device. The extortionist, located on the neighboring island, had grown impatient. Lauren sent a direct message to Bradley intercepted inbox demanding an immediate deposit of $20,000 or she would release the forged mortgage metadata to the local authorities by midnight. She was forcing his hand. This sudden acceleration required me to close the gap without further delay. I could not wait for him to finish his pompous speech under the tiki torches. I needed to deliver the payload right now. I stood up from my secluded table. My movement was silent and purposeful. I approached the epicenter of their arrogant display. Bradley was holding court near the open bamboo bar. The wealthy mainland investors were chuckling at his manufactured charm. Diane, Carter, and Megan formed their usual protective ring of snobbery around him. Carter and Megan had flown in from the mainland specifically because Bradley promised them executive positions within his fabricated real estate empire. They relied on his fraudulent success to fund their own lazy aspirations and maintain their least luxury lifestyle. This brings us back to the exact moment where our story began. The warm, oceanic breeze offered no relief from the suffocating entitlement radiating from my in-laws. The scent of roasted Kahlua pork mixed with the sharp tang of expensive rum. I reached into my understated leather clutch. My fingers brushed against the single-folded sheet of heavy bond paper. It contained the highly redacted financial records, the micro-locator logs, and the wire transfer receipts proving his extreme betrayal. I stepped right into his spotlight, disrupting the perfect circle of his admirers. I slid the document across the polished teak surface. "Read the top line out loud, honey," I instructed, my voice cutting through the ambient ukulele music with deadly precision. "Everyone is curious." Bradley offered a dismissive chuckle. He picked up the paper with a dramatic flourish, intending to deliver another punchline to his adoring crowd. He expected a grocery list or a mundane domestic reminder. His eyes scanned the crisp black ink. He read the line detailing the $850,000 second mortgage and the subsequent wire transfers to the luxury resort under his mistress' name. The smugness fractured entirely. The blood drained from his face in a split second, leaving a sickly translucent pallor behind. His jaw unhinged. The paper trembled in his sudden weak grip. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, rolling down his cheek. He could not form a single coherent syllable. Diane, sensing the terrifying shift in her golden boy demeanor, leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes darted across the highlighted ledger. She saw the undeniable truth. The primary estate, the guest house, and the liquid capital belonged entirely to Oak Haven Logistics, my primary limited liability corporation. She let out a sharp, breathless gasp, loud enough to silence the chatter at our table. "That is her account," Diane hissed, her voice cracking as she turned on her son with unfiltered horror. "You told us the house money was yours. You told us you paid for everything." The surrounding investors stopped talking. The silence grew heavy, pressing down on the group like a physical weight. Carter and Megan exchanged panicked glances, their dreams of unearned executive salaries evaporating into the humid night air. The illusion of the wealthy patriarch had been shattered with a single piece of paper. The man they worshipped as a self-made titan was exposed as a hollow fraud, stealing from his own wife to fund his delusions. I looked down at the face of my watch. The digital number shifted to exactly 7 in the evening. The automated federal asset freeze initiated by Elias and the Banking Fraud Division went live across all institutional servers at that very microsecond. Every dime, every line of credit, every hidden offshore routing number attached to Bradley was locked down tight. The digital snare closed with flawless execution, severing his access to the global financial network. Bradley operates on pure, fragile ego. Panic makes him default to false bravado. He needed to prove to the staring crowd that he was still the apex earner. He needed to reestablish his dominance before the whispering started. He crushed the incriminating paper in his fist and turned toward the bartender. "Drinks are on me," he shouted, his voice pitching too high, attempting to project confidence. "Rounds of your finest reserve rum for the entire table. Put it on my tab." He reached into his tailored linen jacket and pulled out his heavy metal credit card. He slammed it down onto the bamboo counter. The metallic clack echoed over the quiet murmurs of the crowd. The bartender, a young man in a crisp white uniform, picked up the card. He inserted the chip into the point-of-sale terminal. The machine processed the request, connecting to the banking network. A sharp, undeniable beep echoed over the bar. Declined. The word flashed in bright red letters across the small screen. Bradley flushed a deep shade of crimson. "Run it again," he ordered, waving a dismissive hand. "It is a security hold because I spend so much on entertainment. Do not just stand there, process the payment. I am hosting this event." The bartender ran the card a second time. The machine beeped again, producing the exact same negative result. The young man looked at the terminal screen and then looked up at my husband. "I am sorry, sir," the bartender said, his tone carrying polite detachment. "The issuer requested that I retain this card. Furthermore, your event account has been flagged for non-payment by the catering management team. They were just notified that the initial deposit wire was reversed." Bradley stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked around at the mainland investors who were now stepping backward, distancing themselves from the unfolding humiliation. They recognized a sinking ship and possessed the self-preservation instincts to move away from the wreckage. Diane covered her mouth with her hand, stepping away from her son. The bartender reached under the counter and pulled out a pair of metal scissors. "Sir, I need to ask you to present your wristband," the bartender instructed. Bradley did not move. His eyes were wide, filled with the dawning realization of his ruin. The young man reached across the bamboo surface, hooked the blade under the purple VIP event band on my husband's wrist, and cleanly snipped it in half. The small piece of paper fluttered to the damp grass below, landing near his expensive leather loafers. The live financial execution was broadcasting to his entire network of elite peers. The man who had mocked my little hobby business just minutes ago was now standing in front of his crucial business contacts, unable to purchase a single glass of rum. He had no access to his hidden accounts. He had no access to the stolen equity. He was stripped bare in front of the very people he sought to impress. The armor of his wealth was stripped away, leaving only the raw, desperate reality of his crimes. This public dismantling was merely the opening maneuver. Bradley was backed into a corner, and cornered predators do not surrender quietly. He needed a scapegoat to salvage his shattered reputation. He turned his desperate, furious eyes toward me, preparing to launch a highly toxic smear campaign to deflect the blame. He was about to unleash a frantic counterattack that would force me to deploy the ultimate legal defense. The physical manifestation of his ruined status lay severed on the damp grass at his feet. Instead of offering a shred of accountability or attempting a graceful apology, the fragile ego residing within my husband splintered into unhinged aggression. Bradley could not accept public defeat. He operated on a psychological framework that demanded a villain to shield his collapsing facade. He spun around, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face, his features contorted in a mask of desperate fury. "She hacked my private files," he roared, his voice cracking under the strain. He cast his frantic gaze across the audience of wealthy mainland investors, hoping to spin the narrative before they mentally categorized him as a toxic asset. "She is unstable. She is financially abusing me to cover up her failing online shop." His attempt at defamation was predictable. Bradley had spent his entire adult life coasting on his mother's enabling praise and his own fabricated charm. He possessed no actual defense mechanism other than shifting the blame onto the nearest convenient target. He continued shouting, weaving a chaotic tale about how my supposed petty craft business was bankrupting our household, and how he was the tragic victim of a hysterical spouse trying to ruin his pristine real estate reputation. Diane, true to her parasitic nature, instantly rallied behind her golden boy. She stepped forward, her silk caftan rustling against the tropical breeze, her face twisted with misplaced righteous indignation. "You vindictive little liar," she hissed, attempting to close the distance between us. "You are trying to destroy my son out of pure jealousy because he is successful and you are just a bitter woman." Carter and Megan murmured their agreement, forming a pathetic physical wall of defense behind the matriarch. They attempted a rapid, coordinated smear campaign right there on the illuminated lawn, expecting their collective hostility to make me shrink, apologize, and flee the venue in tears. It was their classic family dynamic to gang up on the outsider until the target surrendered merely to maintain the peace. They genuinely believed their sheer volume could override a forensic paper trail. I did not surrender. I did not retreat. I stood perfectly still, my posture radiating the unyielding corporate authority I utilize daily to command boardrooms filled with military contractors. I let their chaotic, frantic energy crash against my silence. When a target refuses to react to provocation, the manipulator experiences a profound, terrifying spike in anxiety. I watched the realization dawn in Bradley's eyes that his usual bullying tactics were bouncing off an impenetrable shield. I stepped 1 inch closer to him. I did not raise my voice to match his hysterical shouting. I let my tone drop into a cold, lethal whisper that forced him to stop breathing just to hear the words. I did not hack anything, Bradley, I stated, articulating each syllable with surgical precision. I simply authorized a forensic audit of my own company, and you just loudly confessed to wire fraud in front of 50 influential mainland investors. The impact of that sentence struck him like a physical blow. He looked past my shoulder, locking eyes with the very real estate developers he had spent the entire evening trying to impress. They were not nodding in sympathy. They were pulling out their smartphones, whispering among themselves, and capturing the undeniable implosion of his career. The high-net-worth individuals he worshipped recognized a failing enterprise when they saw one. They were already taking steps away from the bamboo bar, creating a wide, isolating perimeter around our table. Realizing the audience was entirely lost and his reputation permanently fractured, Bradley grabbed Diane by the arm. His grip was tight enough to make her wince in surprise. "We are leaving," he sneered, his eyes darting frantically toward the paved parking area. He needed to execute a tactical retreat. He assumed he could salvage the stolen funds from his secure laptop back at the beachfront estate before the authorities mobilized. "Get the cars. We will deal with her delusions at the house." He barked the order at Carter and Megan, who quickly abandoned their half-empty champagne flutes on a nearby table. The 4 of them marched away from the tiki bar, their previous aristocratic swagger replaced by a hurried, frantic shuffle. They moved like cornered scavengers, desperate to return to the safety of their nest. I remained near the catering tables, watching their retreat with a profound sense of anticipation. The snare had many sequential layers, and they were sprinting directly into the next steel jaw. They arrived at the valet stand, a polished wooden podium situated near the grand entrance of the resort. Carter slapped his ticket onto the counter, demanding his imported luxury sport utility vehicle with his usual unearned arrogance. He tapped his designer loafers on the pavement, expecting the attendant to jog out and retrieve the car I had financed for him. The attendant, a young man wearing a floral uniform shirt, looked down at the ticket and then typed the details into his digital tablet. He frowned, looking back up at Carter with an expression of firm professional detachment. "I am sorry, sir," the valet stated clearly. "I cannot retrieve that vehicle for you." Carter scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "What do you mean you cannot retrieve it? I handed you the keys an hour ago. Go fetch the car before I speak to your manager." "My manager is already aware of the situation," the attendant replied, unfazed by the hollow threat. "The leasing company contacted our security dispatch 20 minutes ago. They authorized a commercial towing company to impound the vehicle. It was legally reported as a terminated contract awaiting repossession. The tow truck already secured the chassis and removed it from the premises. You will need to contact the leasing agency directly to discuss your personal belongings left inside." Megan let out a sharp, high-pitched gasp. "Impounded!" she shrieked, clutching her purse tightly against her chest. "That is a $100,000 car! You let someone steal our car?" "It is not your car, ma'am," the valet corrected, maintaining his composure. "It belongs to the corporate lien holder, and they reclaimed their property." Carter turned to his brother, his face pale with sudden comprehension. "Brad, what is going on? Why is the lease terminated?" Bradley could not answer. The cold reality of the financial freeze was extending far beyond his own pockets. The protective umbrella he had cast over his brother was evaporating in real time. He realized I had not just locked down the checking accounts, I had systematically severed every single corporate lifeline sustaining their entire bloodline. Diane, watching her younger son lose his prize status symbol, turned her frantic gaze toward the street. "Well, call a cab," she demanded, her voice shaking with residual adrenaline. "We cannot just stand here on the curb like vagrants. Call a premium service. We need to get back to the guest house immediately." Bradley pulled out his smartphone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He opened a premium rideshare application, attempting to book a luxury black car. The app processed the request, pinged his default payment method, and instantly kicked back a bold red error notification. His primary card was frozen. His backup card was frozen. The corporate account he illegally tethered to my logistics firm was locked tight. He was entirely stripped of his purchasing power. He possessed a single emergency debit card linked to a low-balance personal checking account he opened years prior, long before he gained access to my wealth. He switched the payment method, praying the negligible funds inside would cover the fare. The application accepted the secondary card, dispatching a standard mid-tier sedan to their location. There would be no luxury black car transportation tonight. When the rideshare arrived, it was a cramped, utilitarian vehicle smelling faintly of stale air freshener. It was a stark contrast to the imported leather interiors they were accustomed to inhabiting. Bradley shoved open the door, urging his hyperventilating family inside. They squeezed into the back seat, their expensive resort wear wrinkling against the cheap fabric upholstery. "Just drive," Bradley snapped at the confused driver, barking out the address to the beachfront estate. The sedan sped away from the resort, tires hissing against the coastal pavement. Inside the cramped cabin, the atmosphere was thick with toxic blame and rising panic. Diane wept quietly into her hands, mourning the public humiliation she had just endured. Megan complained bitterly about the loss of her pristine vehicle, while Carter stared blankly out the window, realizing he would have to find actual employment to survive the week. Bradley sat in the front passenger seat, staring straight ahead, his mind racing to calculate a recovery plan. He believed the beachfront estate remained his impregnable fortress. He thought he could retreat to the sprawling property, lock the doors behind him, and use his home office network to bypass the banking freeze. He planned to log into his encrypted offshore portals and transfer the hidden funds before any true investigators caught wind of the situation. He genuinely thought the house was his safe haven, a luxurious sanctuary where he could regroup and launch a counteroffensive to destroy my supply chain business. He was speeding directly toward a heavily fortified reality check. They were retreating to a home that no longer recognized them, entirely unaware of the impenetrable barricade currently awaiting their arrival. The tactical retreat was nothing more than a doomed march into the final, inescapable stage of my corporate execution. The atmosphere inside the budget rideshare was asphyxiating. The heavy scent of cheap pine air freshener mingled with the sour stench of raw fear radiating from the passengers. Outside the tinted windows, the vibrant nightlife of Honolulu blurred past, but inside the cramped cabin, a profound, terrifying realization was taking root in my husband. The financial execution at the luau had stripped him of his domestic supremacy. He sat in the front passenger seat, staring at the digital dashboard of the vehicle, his chest heaving with erratic, shallow breaths. His custom-tailored linen suit was rumpled, his expensive loafers scuffed against the rubber floor mats. The patriarch was dead, and the cornered predator was frantically searching for a new weapon. If he could no longer command my personal wealth, he decided to burn the very source of it to the ground. He believed that destroying my primary revenue stream would force me to crawl back to him begging for a truce. It was a spectacular display of toxic hubris. He reached into his leather messenger bag, which he always carried, to project an aura of constant business readiness, and pulled out his ultra-slim tablet. He connected the device to his cellular hotspot, his fingers trembling so violently he mismanaged the password twice. The screen illuminated his pale, sweating face in the dark cabin. Months ago, during his initial phase of embezzlement, Bradley had covertly downloaded a cached backup of my peripheral corporate address book. He thought he possessed the master keys to my kingdom. He opened his encrypted email client and began highlighting the contact information for my top-tier clients. He selected the procurement directors for the local naval shipyards, the logistics commanders at the Joint Base, and the chief executives of the largest agricultural export syndicates on the islands. These were individuals who managed hundreds of millions of dollars in federal and private capital. They were men and women of uncompromising discipline. Bradley began typing a mass communication, utilizing a tone dripping with manufactured patriarchal concern. I watched the entire drafting process in real time through a hidden keystroke logger I had embedded in his devices weeks ago. His message was a masterpiece of desperate defamation. He addressed the military commanders and corporate titans, claiming that I was currently undergoing a severe psychiatric breakdown. He wrote that the stress of the logistics industry had finally shattered my fragile mental state, rendering my company completely insolvent and operationally paralyzed. The final paragraph of his message contained the true venom. He informed the high-level procurement officers that, to ensure their critical supply chains remained uninterrupted, all future capital disbursements needed to be immediately diverted. He provided the routing numbers for a commercial escrow account controlled exclusively by his failing real estate firm. He essentially commanded the United States military to blindly wire their classified operational budgets into his personal slush fund, portraying himself as the heroic husband stepping in to manage his unstable wife and her failing little hobby business. He hit the send button with a forceful, confident jab of his thumb. He leaned back against the cheap fabric headrest of the sedan, exhaling a long breath. A wicked, triumphant grin crept back onto his face. He genuinely believed he had just checkmated a global logistics chief executive. He fundamentally misunderstood everything about the entities he had just attempted to defraud. The Department of Defense does not operate like a localized country club. Base commanders do not alter high-value disbursement channels based on a frantic, unsolicited message sent from an unverified civilian email address. Military supply chain contracts are bound by the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. Altering a payment destination requires rigorous, multi-layered biometric authorization, intense bureaucratic vetting, and physical signatures sworn under penalty of perjury. Furthermore, my clients knew me. I had flawlessly delivered classified aviation components and sensitive agricultural yields through typhoons and harbor strikes. They trusted my competence implicitly. The emails landed in the secure inboxes of the military commanders. They did not panic. They did not freeze my contracts. They recognized a clumsy, fraudulent phishing attempt instantly. Within 3 minutes of Bradley dispatching his desperate sabotage, my private corporate cell phone began ringing. I sat in my downtown high-rise office, staring at the incoming calls from 3 separate naval procurement officers. I did not answer them directly. I had established a strict communication protocol for this exact scenario. The commanders bypassed me and immediately forwarded the bizarre communications to my lead corporate litigator, Elias. My ruthless attorney was sitting at his own mahogany desk, reviewing the incoming data packets with cold, clinical satisfaction. Elias called me on an encrypted line. His voice was devoid of emotion, but laced with a lethal sense of victory. "Your husband just handed us the kill shot," Elias stated flatly, the sound of a printer engaging in the background of his office. "I am reviewing his mass email to the Joint Base commanders. He explicitly demanded federal funds be routed into his private real estate escrow to bypass your operational authority." "He thinks he is ruining my reputation," I replied, watching the keystroke logger capture Bradley's arrogant follow-up messages to my agricultural partners. "He just committed tortious interference and attempted corporate extortion." Elias corrected his tone, sharp and decisive. "He utilized interstate digital networks to attempt the fraudulent diversion of government capital. This is no longer just a domestic dispute over a forged mortgage. He has actively targeted federal defense budgets. I am bundling these emails with the forged deeds and the microlocator tracking logs. The prosecution is going to feast on this." I ended the call, letting the beautiful logic of the situation wash over me. Bradley thought he was deploying a tactical nuclear strike against my livelihood. Instead, he had meticulously gift-wrapped a supplementary federal charge and handed it directly to the authorities on a silver platter. He provided the exact documented proof required to guarantee a maximum mandatory prison sentence without offering my legal team the slightest bit of friction. In the back of the rideshare, Bradley closed his tablet, slipping it back into his leather bag. He looked out the passenger window at the passing palm trees, feeling a delusional sense of supreme accomplishment. He believed he had successfully paralyzed my infrastructure. He thought he had forced my hand, ensuring I would be begging him to reverse the damage by tomorrow morning. He expected to ride out the rest of the evening in the comfort of his luxurious beachfront sanctuary, plotting his total takeover of my empire. The sedan turned off the main coastal highway, navigating toward the exclusive, secluded neighborhood where my primary estate was located. The street lamps cast long shadows over the pristine, manicured lawns of the surrounding properties. Bradley sat up straighter, adjusting his rumpled linen jacket, preparing to reclaim his throne. He was entirely consumed by his own arrogance, totally unaware that the kingdom he was speeding toward had already violently rejected him. He was completely blind to the devastating, impenetrable barricade currently waiting for him at the end of the driveway. I sat in the austere silence of my downtown corner office, watching the high-definition security feed broadcast across my monitors. The tropical night had fully descended over the island, bringing a profound darkness to the coastline. Yet my beachfront estate was illuminated like a professional stadium. The budget sedan carrying my husband and his family turned onto the private coastal road. The driver tapped his brakes, shielding his eyes from the blinding glare of industrial halogen spotlights mounted along the perimeter wall. The soft, ambient landscape lighting I usually kept dimmed had been entirely disconnected. In its place, a battery of tactical floodlights washed the manicured lawn in a harsh, unforgiving white glow. The vehicle stopped at the curb. Bradley shoved the passenger door open, stepping onto the pavement. He expected to find his luxurious sanctuary waiting to embrace his bruised ego. Instead, he encountered an impenetrable fortress. The sleek biometric smart locks on the main residence and the adjacent guest house were gone. My property management team had operated with surgical efficiency during the luau. The modern glass keypads had been hollowed out and replaced with thick commercial steel deadbolts. The aesthetic appeal of the home was temporarily sacrificed for uncompromising fortification. The structure no longer resembled a welcoming island retreat. It projected the cold, sterile authority of a guarded federal vault. Positioned at the base of the stamped concrete driveway stood a towering private security contractor. He wore a crisp, dark uniform, his arms resting in front of his broad chest. A heavy-duty clipboard rested in his right hand. Flanking this contractor were two uniformed officers from the Honolulu Police Department, their hands resting casually near their utility belts. They projected a calm, silent authority that immediately suffocated any residual mainland bravado Bradley possessed. Bradley adjusted his wrinkled linen jacket, attempting to summon the patriarchal command he had wielded so freely just hours prior. He marched up the incline, his leather loafers scraping against the concrete. "What is the meaning of this?" Bradley shouted, his voice echoing against the exterior stucco. He pointed a trembling finger at the drilled front door. "Who authorized you to touch my house? Step aside and let my family inside right now." The private contractor did not flinch. He took one measured step forward, intercepting my husband before he could reach the porch steps. The contractor lifted the heavy clipboard and extracted a thick manila envelope. He extended his arm, pressing the legal parcel directly against Bradley and his chest. "Bradley Collins," the contractor asked, establishing formal identification. "Yes, I own this estate," Bradley retorted, snatching the envelope. "I demand an explanation." "The property is an active federal crime scene regarding bank fraud, sir," the contractor stated flatly, his tone devoid of any emotion. "You are legally barred from entry." Bradley ripped the seal, pulling out the crisp pages. The intense illumination from the tactical floodlights caught the stark black typography of the federal court seal. The first document was an emergency civil restraining order. The second was an immediate asset seizure warrant authorized by a federal magistrate just hours ago. The paperwork explicitly listed his name, his offshore shell companies, and the forged second mortgage. Because the original electronic wire transfers and the digital forgery occurred on the local network inside that specific structure, the judge recognized the estate as a compromised location, requiring immediate preservation of evidence. The blood drained from his face for the second time that evening. His eyes darted rapidly across the legal text, trying to find a loophole, a clerical error, or any sign of a bluff. He found nothing but airtight litigation. Elias had drafted a flawless execution order. Behind him, the remaining parasites spilled out of the rideshare. Diane stumbled onto the sidewalk, clutching her silk wrap against the cool ocean breeze. She stared at the sprawling guest house she had treated as her personal kingdom for years. The windows were dark, the locks were destroyed, and a stark white legal notice was taped directly to the pristine glass of the front door. "No," Diane wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of sudden poverty. "This is my home. Bradley, tell them to let me inside. My clothes are in there. My jewelry is in there. You promised me this house." Bradley could not answer her. He stood paralyzed, staring at the federal warrant in his shaking hands. The lie he had fed his mother for years had officially expired. He never owned the estate. He never provided her sanctuary. He was a fraud standing on a sidewalk holding the documented proof of his own failure. Carter and Megan huddled together on the edge of the curb, shivering in their expensive luau attire. They looked like discarded props from a canceled theater production. Megan wrapped her arms around her shoulders, her status-obsessed mind finally grasping the depth of their ruin. They possessed no keys to any luxury vehicles. They held zero access to premium credit lines. They were standing on a public street, staring at the cold steel barrier of my logistics empire. The realization hit Carter that he possessed no marketable skills and no wealthy brother to subsidize his endless leisure. I watched the security feed, feeling a profound sense of closure. For years, they had treated me as an invisible servant, existing solely to fund their tropical vacations. Diane had demanded imported marble renovations for a structure she did not own. Carter had wrecked vehicles I financed without a single word of gratitude. Bradley had utilized my unseen labor to fund a hidden life of infidelity and extortion. Now, the biological umbilical cord was severed. The host had officially rejected the parasites. They were left with nothing but the humid night air and the clothes on their backs. One of the local officers stepped forward, tapping a flashlight against his palm. "Sir," the officer stated, his tone firm and unyielding, "the restraining order mandates a 500-foot minimum distance from this address and all affiliated corporate properties. You need to vacate the perimeter immediately, or you will be placed under arrest for violating a federal court order." A rational man facing federal bank fraud warrants and armed police officers would seek immediate legal counsel and quietly surrender. But Bradley operated on a foundation of pathological narcissism. Accepting defeat meant acknowledging his own mediocrity. He crumpled the restraining order in his fist, shoving it deep into his pocket. He turned back toward his shivering family, projecting a final desperate surge of synthetic confidence. "We do not need this house," Bradley lied, forcing a strained smile. "She thinks she can scare us with some paperwork. We are taking a real vacation. We will check into a luxury suite and let the lawyers untangle this mess in the morning." He was attempting to pivot, aiming for the only remaining sanctuary he believed his stolen capital could purchase. He herded his sobbing mother and panicked brother back toward the waiting sedan. They squeezed into the cheap interior, directing the driver toward the tourist epicenter of the island. They were retreating to a pristine resort, expecting to charge an extended stay to the very accounts I had already frozen solid. Bradley thought he was orchestrating a clever evasion. He failed to comprehend that his next destination was not a refuge, but the designated stage for his ultimate public downfall. The digital dashboard illuminating my home office monitor painted a vivid portrait of a fractured reality. The premium rideshare my husband hailed the previous evening never reached its intended luxury destination. My forensic tracking software indicated the transportation application suspended the journey mid-route when the primary payment method failed a routine authorization check. The driver unceremoniously deposited Bradley and his entourage on the shoulder of a bustling commercial highway. Stripped of digital currency, they were forced to pool whatever loose physical cash they carried in their pockets just to secure shelter. They spent a miserable, sleepless night in a decaying airport motel located under the deafening flight path of Honolulu International. Diane, a woman accustomed to imported Egyptian cotton sheets and climate-controlled guest houses, was subjected to a sagging mattress smelling faintly of stale smoke and bleach. Carter and Megan spent the dark hours complaining about the faulty air conditioning, blaming the suffocating tropical humidity for their mounting panic. Bradley paced the stained carpet until dawn, attempting to convince his shivering family that the financial freeze was a temporary algorithmic glitch. He spun a frantic narrative, claiming my jealous temper tantrum triggered an automated security hold on his vast real estate wealth. He promised them redemption by morning. Refusing to accept their new, destitute reality, Bradley rallied his exhausted relatives at sunrise. They hailed a standard yellow taxi, burning the very last of their pocket change to reach the epicenter of Oahu tourism. They directed the driver to one of Waikiki's most exclusive five-star beachfront resorts. The property is a towering architectural marvel, renowned for cascading indoor waterfalls, polished marble floors, and uncompromising elite service. Bradley intended to march inside, secure a sprawling penthouse suite, and charge the exorbitant daily rate to the very accounts I had already locked tight. He needed to prove to his mother and brother that he still reigned supreme over his fictional empire. From the quiet sanctuary of my downtown high-rise, I watched a pending transaction request materialize on my encrypted banking ledger. The geographic ping indicated their exact location at the premier resort concierge desk. Bradley strutted through the revolving glass doors, projecting false supremacy. His tailored linen suit was deeply wrinkled from the motel floor, and his eyes carried the heavy dark circles of a man hunted by his own lies. Diane followed closely behind him, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a shield against her profound humiliation. Carter and Megan flanked them, scanning the opulent lobby with desperate, hungry eyes. They approached the polished mahogany reception counter, demanding immediate attention. The concierge, a seasoned hospitality professional wearing an immaculate charcoal uniform, noted their disheveled appearance, but maintained a polite veneer. He offered a welcoming nod, asking how he could elevate their island experience. "Presidential suite," Bradley commanded, his voice echoing louder than necessary over the soft, ambient, slack-key guitar music playing through the lobby speakers. "We will be staying for an indefinite period. Put the incidental hold on my primary ledger." Bradley slapped his heavy platinum credit card onto the smooth wood surface. He slid the metal across the counter, expecting the concierge to bow in deference to his undeniable status. The employee picked up the card and inserted the smart chip into the point-of-sale terminal. I watched the digital authorization request hit my server. I sat perfectly still, savoring the quiet hum of my cooling fans, while my software automatically generated the rejection code. A sharp electronic tone pierced the serene atmosphere of the hotel lobby. The terminal flashed a bright red error message. The concierge discreetly removed the card, wiping the metallic chip against his pristine sleeve, believing a smudge caused the malfunction. He inserted the plastic a second time. The identical harsh tone echoed again. "I apologize, sir," the concierge murmured, his tone dipping into a practiced, apologetic register. "The issuing institution has declined the authorization request. Do you perhaps have an alternate method of payment we could try?" The remaining color drained from Bradley's face, replaced instantly by a deep, hostile crimson flush. The veins along his neck throbbed against his rumpled collar. His fragile ego, cornered by undeniable public rejection, fractured into desperate denial. "Run it again," Bradley barked, pounding his fist against the mahogany edge. "There was a processing delay with my wealth management firm. Force the transaction through your system. I am a prominent local developer, and I do not have time for incompetent machinery." The concierge remained unfazed by the outburst. He stepped back slightly, signaling a subtle warning to the nearby resort security staff. "Sir, I cannot bypass a hard decline from your financial institution. I must ask for another card." Diane shoved her way to the front of a counter. She scoffed loudly, attempting to rescue her golden boy from the mounting embarrassment. She reached into her purse and retrieved her own gleaming gold card. She slapped it down onto the terminal with aristocratic flair. "Use mine," Diane ordered, acting like a queen granting a pardon to a peasant. "My son handles my portfolio. The bank is merely upgrading our security protocols." The gold card rested on the scanner. That specific piece of plastic was tethered directly to my secondary corporate logistics account. I had reduced the spending limit on her authorized user profile to exactly $0. The concierge processed the magnetic stripe. The machine rejected it, instantly emitting a continuous buzzing sound that drew the attention of everyone standing nearby. The grand lobby fell remarkably silent. Wealthy international tourists paused their conversations. The symphony of elite vacationers halted entirely, replaced by the captivating theater of public ruin. Dozens of affluent onlookers turned to watch the spectacle unfolding at the reception desk. They recognized the stench of a fabricated persona collapsing under scrutiny. Carter and Megan stared at the glowing red terminal screen. The parasitic bond holding their family together shattered under the intense pressure of undeniable poverty. Megan turned on her brother-in-law, her voice reaching a shrill, piercing pitch that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "You said you had millions," Megan shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Bradley. "You promised us executive salaries and luxury accommodations. Where is the money, Bradley? Our leased cars are gone. We slept in a filthy motel. You are a fraud." Carter joined the fray, his own unearned arrogance dissolving into pure panic. "You ruined our future," Carter yelled, stepping into Bradley's personal space. "You told us your wife was just a clueless hobbyist. You told us you controlled the estate. You stole our stability to fund your own ego." Cornered by his own relatives and scrutinized by an audience of affluent strangers, Bradley lost his final grip on sanity. He threw an unhinged, spectacular public tantrum. He pounded both fists fiercely against the pristine concierge desk, rattling the expensive computer monitors. He shouted incoherent threats, demanding respect and citing his non-existent real estate empire. He cursed the bank, he cursed the hotel staff, and he cursed my name. His sophisticated facade melted away entirely, leaving a terrified, desperate fraud exposed to the world. He looked small, pathetic, and deeply unqualified to navigate the consequences of his actions. Diane wept openly, covering her face with her hands, unable to shield herself from the judging stares of the wealthy tourists she so desperately wanted to emulate. From my high-rise office, I watched the transaction alerts cease. The local resort security personnel advanced toward the screaming man, attempting to de-escalate his hostile outburst before escorting the entire disgraced family off the premises. But I knew hotel security was merely a prelude to a much darker reckoning. My encrypted smartphone vibrated on my desk. A secure text message arrived from Elias, my litigator. The communication was brief and carried undeniable weight. The federal authorities had intercepted the rejected transaction ping from the Waikiki resort. The geographic location of the fugitive was officially confirmed. The tactical units were already pulling into the circular driveway of the hotel. The ultimate execution of justice was currently walking through the revolving glass doors, and Bradley was entirely too busy screaming at a receptionist to notice the impending doom closing around his wrists. Bradley stood at the polished mahogany counter, his voice tearing through the serene acoustic atmosphere of the luxury lobby. He demanded the concierge manually bypass the banking network, pointing a shaking finger at the frightened hotel employee. Sweat pooled at his temples, staining the collar of his wrinkled linen shirt. The facade of the wealthy real estate developer dissolved into a pathetic display of raw panic. He hurled insults at the staff, demanding a managerial override, trying to force reality to bend to his fragile ego. The affluent tourists gathered nearby watched in stunned fascination. They clutched their designer luggage and whispered behind manicured hands. The air inside the grand atrium shifted. The soft, slack-key guitar music piping through the overhead speakers seemed to fade into a hollow echo. A heavy, synchronized thudding sound echoed across the imported marble floors. It was not the gentle shuffle of vacationers or the quiet tread of hospitality staff. It was a calculated, rhythmic march. The towering glass doors of the resort swung wide open. The bright Hawaiian morning sunlight spilled into the dim lobby, casting long, stark shadows ahead of the four figures striding through the entrance. They moved in perfect unison, bypassing the bellhops and ignoring the decorative tropical floral arrangements. They wore dark, utilitarian windbreakers. The stark yellow lettering across their shoulders identified them immediately to everyone in the room. FBI and IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Hotel security personnel instinctively stepped back, lowering their radios. You do not interfere when federal authorities cross your threshold. The agents navigated the crowd with lethal efficiency, forming a tight, inescapable perimeter around my husband. The murmurs of the gathered tourists died instantly, leaving only the sound of those heavy tactical boots coming to a final halt. Bradley stopped mid-sentence. His mouth hung open. The spittle glistening on his lip caught the ambient light from the crystal chandeliers above. He stared at the golden badges clipped to the dark windbreakers. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly ash hue. He looked left, then right, searching for an exit that did not exist. The walls of his fabricated empire crumbled into dust right before his eyes. Bradley Collins, the lead agent, announced his voice, carrying an uncompromising federal authority that reverberated through the cavernous space. "You are under arrest for bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and severe tax evasion." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. There was no negotiation available. There was no charming his way out of the lobby. Bradley did not attempt to fight. His knees buckled slightly, his spine losing all structural integrity. He simply froze, surrendering to the overwhelming gravity of the moment. The lead agent stepped forward, grabbing Bradley by the shoulder and spinning him around. The sharp metallic click of cold steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Diane watched the scene unfold from a few feet away. Her mind failed to process the devastating reality of her golden son wearing federal restraints. She let out a piercing, guttural wail. Her knees gave out beneath her, and she dropped straight onto the hard marble floor. She wept openly, clutching her useless gold credit card, pleading with the stern officers to release her boy. She tried to tell them he was a prominent developer, a man of high society status. The agents ignored her theatrics, focusing entirely on securing their suspect. Carter and Megan demonstrated their true parasitic nature in that exact moment. They did not rush to comfort Diane. They did not shout in defense of their provider. When the federal windbreakers appeared, they recognized the scent of a sinking ship. Carter grabbed his wife by the elbow, taking slow, deliberate steps backward. They retreated into the crowd of onlookers, desperate to put physical distance between themselves and the unfolding criminal spectacle. They severed the bonds of familial loyalty the instant the money evaporated, choosing cowardly self-preservation over standing by their ruined brother. The agents flanked Bradley, gripping his arms and guiding him toward the exit. The humiliating procession began. The tourists who had initially watched in shock now pulled out their smartphones. Hundreds of tiny camera lenses tracked his every step. The flashes illuminated his tear-streaked face, capturing his disgrace from every possible angle. He was paraded through the grand lobby, out the glass doors, and down the sweeping concrete driveway. The man who had mocked my business endeavors 24 hours earlier was shoved into the back of a dark federal transport vehicle, stripped of his freedom and his pride. I monitored the entire sequence from my downtown high-rise office, receiving live encrypted updates from Elias. My attorney had coordinated closely with the task force, ensuring the timing of the arrest maximized the disruption to Bradley and his fraudulent operations. The physical capture was merely the initial phase of the justice delivery system. The true reckoning arrived later, during the arraignment process. When a suspect enters the federal court system, they rely on high-powered defense attorneys to navigate the labyrinth of white-collar prosecution. Wealthy individuals hire relentless legal teams to negotiate bail terms and suppress evidence. Bradley assumed he could simply call a prominent local firm to secure his release. He believed he could sign a retainer agreement using the liquid capital he had routed into his offshore shell companies. He sat in the holding cell, formulating a strategy to access his hidden funds, unaware that Elias and I had already drained the swamp. During his initial hearing before the federal magistrate, Bradley demanded to retain private counsel. The judge reviewed the asset seizure warrants generated by our forensic audit. The magistrate informed my husband that every single account ledger and trust tied to his name was currently frozen under federal order. He possessed zero access to liquid currency. He owned no property. He held no legitimate commercial equity. The court officially designated him indigent. He was denied bail due to the severe flight risk associated with his hidden overseas accounts. The judge remanded him to federal custody. Because he lacked the financial means to hire a private attorney, the court appointed a public defender to represent him against the United States government. This was the exact moment the poetic justice I had engineered came full circle. Public defenders are overworked, dedicated professionals, handling crushing caseloads. They operate within a system constantly starved for resources. 5 years ago, I established a philanthropic initiative through my logistics corporation to support local legal aid offices. We provide substantial funding for their administrative software, paralegal training, and office infrastructure. My company serves as one of the largest corporate sponsors for the exact legal defense organization assigned to represent my husband. The attorney assigned to Bradley's case received his paycheck from an office kept afloat by my charitable donations. The lawyer would provide a standard, competent defense by the book following all constitutional requirements. However, Bradley would receive zero elite privilege. There would be no private catering brought into the consultation rooms. There would be no dedicated team of junior associates working around the clock to find a loophole in the prosecution strategy. He would get the exact same overworked representation afforded to every other indigent defendant navigating the criminal justice system. He was forced to sit across a metal table from a tired lawyer wearing a cheap suit, relying on the charity of the wife he had so deeply underestimated. The irony was a brilliant, pristine gem. He tried to build a kingdom by stealing my wealth, but in the end, my wealth was the only thing ensuring he received a fair trial for his crimes. The illusion of his superiority was stripped away piece by piece until nothing remained but a hollow, terrified fraud facing decades in a concrete cell. Elias called me from the courthouse confirming the results of the arraignment. The charges were locked. The evidence was overwhelming. The extortionist mistress in Maui had also been apprehended by a secondary federal unit earlier that morning. They swept her cliffside villa, confiscating her electronic devices and securing the digital blackmail demands she had sent to my husband. The conspirators were corralled facing severe, mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines for their coordinated racketeering efforts. I thanked my attorney and ended the call, setting the phone down on my immaculate glass desk. The operation was a flawless success. The domestic threats had been surgically neutralized, and the corporate shields were reestablished stronger than before. Yet securing a victory in the courtroom was only one facet of the resolution. True power requires more than just dismantling your enemies. It requires returning to the foundation you built and enjoying the peace you fought so ruthlessly to protect. I turned my chair toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling Hawaiian coastline, anticipating the dawn of a new, unburdened era. 6 months evaporated the lingering toxicity from my atmosphere with the pristine efficiency of a heavy tropical rainstorm washing a stained sidewalk clean. The Pacific sun cast a brilliant fiery orange glow across the expansive lanai of my restored beachfront estate. The sweeping mahogany decks, previously cluttered with the arrogant footprints of ungrateful relatives, now belonged entirely to me. I replaced the compromised smart locks with an upgraded military-grade perimeter security matrix, ensuring no unwanted visitors could ever breach my sanctuary again. The sprawling property was no longer a hijacked resort funding the delusions of a parasitic family. It had reverted to its original purpose, serving as an impenetrable fortress of solitude for a woman who built her own kingdom from scratch. I stood near the edge of the infinity pool, holding a delicate crystal glass of aged Pinot Noir, letting the cool evening ocean breeze wash over my skin. The suffocating noise of my former in-laws complaining about outdated bathroom tiles and demanding imported champagne had been permanently silenced. In its place, the rhythmic crashing of the waves offered a profound, deeply satisfying acoustic backdrop to my ultimate victory. The federal justice system moves with a deliberate, grinding inevitability that crushes arrogant men into fine powder. Bradley learned this harsh lesson inside a windowless courtroom, devoid of the affluent audience he always craved to validate his existence. His trial did not feature brilliant legal maneuvers or charismatic speeches from high-priced attorneys. Elias, my relentless corporate litigator, coordinated directly with the federal prosecutors to present the forensic audit, the forged mortgage deeds, and the intercepted digital extortion logs. Confronted by an insurmountable wall of irrefutable data, his assigned public defender advised an immediate guilty plea. The presiding judge exhibited zero leniency for a man who utilized corporate forgery to steal home equity and fund a secret life. Bradley was sentenced to a mandatory minimum of 12 years inside a federal penitentiary located on the mainland, far away from the tropical paradise he sought to rule. The tailored linen suits he wore to project dominance were exchanged for a coarse, standardized canvas uniform. He spends his days confined to a concrete cell, stripped of his vanity, his luxury vehicles, and his manufactured supremacy. The man who mockingly called my life work a cute online shop now earns pennies an hour performing menial labor in a noisy prison laundry facility. The intense gravity of his collapse also pulled his extortionist partner directly into the judicial abyss. Lauren, the ambitious, unlicensed real estate hustler, who thought she could blackmail her way into permanent luxury, found her cliffside Maui villa replaced by a dreary federal holding facility. The digital trap I intercepted proved she actively directed the forgery and utilized interstate networks to threaten a bank fraud suspect for financial gain. Her towering hubris blinded her to the very real and immediate consequences of federal racketeering statutes. She was indicted as a direct accomplice to the conspiracy and sentenced alongside the man she attempted to bleed dry. The tropical vacation she orchestrated transformed into an extended involuntary stay within the rigid penal system. They both believed they were cunning apex predators manipulating the system for a free ride, but they simply built their own cages and willingly handed me the locks. The peripheral parasites suffered a different but equally devastating brand of justice out in the civilian world. Diane Carter and Megan discovered that surviving in the modern economy without a wealthy host is an unforgiving, brutal experience. Divested of the million-dollar guest house, the corporate leased utility vehicles, and the endless flow of my stolen capital, they plummeted down the socioeconomic ladder at terminal velocity. They were forced to secure housing together in a cramped, unventilated apartment complex located deep inland, miles away from the elite coastal bubbles they used to haunt. The shimmering turquoise ocean views were replaced by the depressing sight of cracked asphalt and rusted chain-link fences. The humid, stagnant air inside their tiny rental unit served as a constant, miserable reminder of the paradise they squandered. Carter, possessing no actual marketable skills and a resume consisting solely of vague consulting titles fabricated by his brother, was rejected by every reputable real estate firm on the island. The mainland investors who witnessed the spectacular financial execution at the luau severed all ties, isolating the family from any potential corporate lifelines. To pay the basic utility bills and keep food on the table, Carter was forced to accept an entry-level clerical position, working grueling shifts under the harsh fluorescent lights of a windowless office building. Megan, who previously scoffed at my modest wardrobe and spent her afternoons sipping expensive cocktails by my pool, now spends her days clipping grocery coupons and navigating the harsh reality of a strict household budget. The diamond tennis bracelets and designer sunglasses vanished, sold to local pawn shops just to cover their security deposit on the miserable apartment. Diane absorbed the hardest psychological blow of them all. She lost her coveted status as the matriarch of a thriving, wealthy dynasty. She can no longer host lavish catered brunches or brag to her country club associates about her brilliant, successful son. Her social circle abandoned her the exact moment the federal arrest records became public knowledge and circulated through the local gossip networks. High society abhors a scandal, especially one involving stolen equity and federal wire fraud. Diane now sits in a sweltering living room, isolated and ignored, forced to confront the undeniable fact that her golden boy was a hollow fraud. She traded the comfortable, beautiful sanctuary I provided for a miserable, sweltering reality simply because she felt entitled to disrespect the woman funding her existence. While their fabricated world disintegrated into ash, my legitimate empire expanded with unprecedented velocity. Removing the relentless financial drain and the daily emotional distraction of my deceptive husband allowed my logistics firm to optimize operations and scale rapidly. The energy I previously wasted managing his fragile ego was redirected into securing substantial growth opportunities. Just last week, my company finalized a monumental 10-year expansion contract with the United States Department of Defense. The agreement entrusts my expert team with managing an entire network of highly sensitive supply chain corridors across the vast Pacific theater. It is a lucrative alliance requiring the highest levels of security clearance and logistical precision. I sit in rooms with 4-star generals and global supply directors, commanding respect through flawless execution. My little hobby business, as they so arrogantly labeled it, is currently recognized as one of the most formidable private contracting entities operating within the Hawaiian archipelago. The sheer staggering disparity between our current circumstances serves as a beautiful, flawless testament to the power of silent competence. They spent their energy curating a loud, flashy illusion. They purchased expensive watches, threw lavish parties, and bought costly drinks to convince strangers they mattered in the grand scheme of the island elite. They prioritized the shallow aesthetic of wealth over the rigorous discipline of actual creation. I spent my energy building a resilient, unshakable foundation. I audited the ledgers, monitored the shipping manifests, and forged ironclad alliances with global defense commanders. When the pressure tested both structures, their fragile house of cards blew away, leaving nothing behind but federal indictments and broken egos. My foundation held firm, repelling their malicious attacks and launching a devastating counteroffensive that eradicated the threat permanently. I took another slow sip of my wine, the rich, complex flavors blooming on my palate as I watched a group of seabirds dive toward the rolling surf. The transition from a silent, compliant spouse to a ruthless corporate executioner did not require a fundamental change in my character. It simply required redirecting my operational focus from protecting external cargo to protecting myself. I recognized a severely compromised node in my personal network, and I amputated the infected tissue before the rot could reach my core. The peace I feel standing on this deck is not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of absolute security. A loud, arrogant man will always interpret a quiet demeanor as a symptom of weakness. They mistake silence for ignorance, believing that because you do not shout your accomplishments from a tiki bar, you must have nothing of value to say or defend. They fundamentally misunderstand the nature of control. True power never needs to brag loudly at a beachfront luau to demand attention. True power operates efficiently in the background. It meticulously audits the hidden accounts, verifies the encrypted routing numbers, and quietly seals every available exit. It lets the adversary dig their own grave, handing them the shovel and watching them work until they are too deep to climb out. And when the trap is perfectly constructed, true power waits for the exact, flawless moment to drop the inescapable hammer of justice. I turned away from the crashing waves and walked back into my impenetrable home, ready to conquer whatever challenge dared to cross my path next. There is a distinct, haunting silence that settles over a mother when she watches cold steel cuffs click around her child's wrists. For Diane, standing in the opulent, marble-floored lobby of a Waikiki resort, that sharp, metallic sound was the fatal echo of 3 decades of parental failure. Society often examines a man like Bradley, a hollow architect of forged deeds, hidden mistresses, and desperate federal fraud, and readily labels him a monster. But monsters of entitlement are rarely born into this world fully formed. They are meticulously crafted, year by year, excuse by excuse, under the tragic, misguided guise of unconditional love. Reflecting on the ashes of the Collins family empire brings us face to face with a profound, deeply uncomfortable mirror regarding how we raise children in modern American culture. We inhabit a society that frequently confuses net worth with human value, where the polished veneer of success receives far louder applause than the quiet, invisible discipline required to sustain it. We hand our children leased keys to imported cars, demanding they project an image of supremacy, yet we forget to teach them the fundamental mechanics of honesty. We prioritize the aesthetic of the family reunion over the integrity of the individuals attending it. Diane occupied a sprawling beachfront guest house she did not own, sipping champagne purchased with stolen capital, all while cheering as her son mocked the very woman keeping a roof over their heads. She thought she was being a supportive mother. She believed that standing by her golden boy during his cruel jokes at a sunset luau was an act of maternal loyalty. What she failed to realize is that every time she validated his unearned arrogance, she was tightening the very noose that would eventually hang his future. Parenting, at its core, is a sacred, heavy responsibility. It requires the emotional awareness to recognize when a child confuses privilege with merit. Within a traditional family structure, true guidance relies on the uncompromising enforcement of fairness and accountability. When a young boy learns he can break a window and his mother will simply blame the wind, he grows into a man who believes he can forge a mortgage and blame the bank. Bradley's descent into a prison cell was not a sudden, unpredictable pivot. It was a slow, predictable slide down a path paved by a mother who shielded him from every minor consequence he ever faced. Contrast this toxic ecosystem with the silent, formidable strength of Ashley. Ashley embodies the exact virtues that traditional parenting should instill. She built an 8-figure logistics empire not by demanding the spotlight or flaunting her revenue, but through grueling labor, operational discipline, and an unwavering commitment to substance over style. She represents a forgotten American ideal that genuine power does not need to brag at a tiki bar. True power works quietly in the background, securing the perimeter and ensuring the foundation holds firm. Had Bradley been raised to value Ashley's brand of quiet integrity rather than the superficial trappings of wealth, he would be an equal partner in an empire instead of a federal inmate. We must ask ourselves what we are truly cultivating inside our own homes. Are we raising resilient, empathetic individuals who understand the weight of a dollar earned through honest labor? Or are we cultivating fragile actors who require a constant, unearned spotlight to survive the friction of the real world? Carter and Meghan serve as prime examples of the collateral damage caused by this failure of guidance. They drifted through life, perfectly content to lease luxury SUVs on someone else's corporate tax ID, entirely devoid of the self-respect that stems from genuine achievement. They were empty vessels, waiting to be filled by Bradley's stolen overflow. There is a pervasive, almost untouchable myth in our culture that a parent's primary duty is to protect their offspring from pain. We rush to soften the blow of a failed exam, to pay off the credit card debt they accrued irresponsibly, to negotiate with the coach when they are benched for poor sportsmanship. We call this love. We view this shielding as the ultimate expression of familial devotion. But here is the jagged, unconventional truth. Shielding a child from the natural consequences of their actions is the most profound form of neglect. It is a slow poison disguised as medicine. The most loving, deeply responsible act a parent can perform is to stand back and let the fire of consequence burn. When you protect a child from the small burns of their youth, you guarantee they will eventually walk blindly into an inferno that leaves nothing but legal indictments, shattered marriages, and ruined lives. Protecting your children from failure is the exact mechanism that ultimately destroys them. To love a child is to let them feel the sharp, undeniable sting of defeat. It requires the courage to look your own flesh and blood in the eye and say no. It demands the emotional fortitude to let them sleep in the bed they made, even if the sheets are threadbare and uncomfortable. Diane never let Bradley sleep in a threadbare bed. She praised his fake-tailored suits and demanded imported marble for a guest house she had no right to occupy. She fed his delusion until the delusion consumed them all, leaving them stranded in an unair-conditioned inland apartment, staring at the blank walls and wondering where the applause went. Stories like Ashley's meticulous triumph over domestic parasitism serve as a brilliant, terrifying cautionary tale for anyone guiding the next generation. We watch these dynamics unfold, and we cheer for the cold, calculated justice delivered upon those who mistake kindness for weakness. If you find yourself drawn to these narratives of resilience, boundaries, and the quiet power of outsmarting the toxic forces in your life, I invite you to follow Sarah Told Stories. Here we dissect the complex layers of human relationships, unmasking the harsh truths hidden behind closed suburban doors, and celebrating the strength it takes to rebuild from the ashes. When the tropical sun dips below the horizon and the flashing police lights fade into memory, the real reckoning begins in the quiet dark. A mother sits on a sagging mattress in a cheap apartment, stripped of the exclusive coastal bubbles and the endless champagne. She reflects on the son sitting in a concrete cell miles away, a son who traded his freedom for the fleeting illusion of elite status. She might blame the logistics executive who froze the accounts. She might curse the federal agents who executed the warrants. But in the deepest, most silent recesses of her mind, a terrifying question must surely take root. Did she love her son enough to save him, or did she love her own reflection in him so much that she allowed him to drown? We spend decades building our families, meticulously arranging the smiling photographs on the mantel, desperate to prove to the world that we have constructed a masterpiece. Yet, when the storm finally breaks and the heavy winds of truth batter against the walls, the aesthetic elements are stripped away in an instant. The only thing left standing is the structural integrity of the character we instilled in those we raised. Look closely at the people sitting around your own dining table tonight. Are you forging pillars capable of holding up the roof in a hurricane? Or are you just polishing the wrought, waiting for the day the ceiling finally caves in?